Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Bet. The word Kiddushin is the same as Erusin, and both indicate the first stage of marriage, and then the second stage is Nisuin with Chuppah. Kiddushin is, we're going to see, is going to be defined today as making, just like when you make something hekdesh, you set it aside for the Bet HaMikdash, and therefore it's prohibited from anybody to use because it is designated and made special in that way. So too, Kiddushin here is when a woman not is dedicated to the Bet HaMikdash, but rather is dedicated or reserved for her future husband. And therefore she is prohibited from everybody else in the world. And now they are not yet married to each other. They still can't live together. So then that way it's similar to engagement. So people don't like to translate Kiddushin as engagement because nowadays people get engaged, but there's no halachic significance to proposing or giving someone a ring without witnesses and saying Harat Mikudeshet Li. So Kiddushin, so nowadays engagement does not have halachic consequences. But in those days it would be similar to engagement, but it has legal consequences. If someone does Kiddushin and then she sleeps with somebody else, that is adultery, even with death penalty. If they break up that engagement, they require a get. So as we're translating, I'd like to use the word engagement or betrothal or legal engagement all as translations of Kiddushin, and you'll know that the common use of engagement that we have today is not the same, but rather I'm talking about legally binding halachic engagement or Kiddushin. So the Mishnah begins. We start with a heading that has numbers. We count how many ways. Tomorrow's daf will tell us what these numbers are excluding. But lots of Mishnayot like to give a listing of numbers because it's easy to remember. So a woman can be acquired. Now, liknot literally means to buy something. Obviously, this is not the same as buying an animal or a field or even a slave. In all those cases, it's a business transaction and you acquire the property rights to that object. Acquiring a woman is not the same thing. How could you tell the difference? Well, if you buy a field or an animal, then the buyer, the owner, can sell it to someone else. That's part of the right of ownership, is the right to sell it. Whereas that's not true for a woman that one engages. He cannot sell her or re-engage her to someone else. If she's exclusively to him, he can divorce her, but cannot transfer that right to anybody else. So this is not a transfer of ownership, but rather a transfer of the rights to marry her, right? Basically, the rights to have relations with her are exclusive to this guy. She's off the market for anybody else. Again, even in English, we say off the market, and we use analogies of buying and selling, even though this is a fundamentally different type of transaction. So there are three ways in which a woman can be acquired, and she can acquire herself, meaning the rights to her own self to go and marry anyone else that she wants, in only two ways. Niknet bekesef bishtar ubebi'ah. She can be acquired, she can be mikudeshet, through money, with a contract, or with relations. In this case, actually not marital, because they're not quite married just yet. And so they would work in similar ways. In all, like in kesef, you have to say harat mikudesheli to make it clear of your intention. There have to be witnesses, and he gives to her money or an equivalent of money, which is also permitted. A shtar would be in a document, you're right, harat mikudeshet li, and he hands her the shtar in front of two witnesses. A bi'ah, there have to be two witnesses that see them enter into a room and be secluded with each other. They don't have to be in the room. They shouldn't be in the room. And that bi'ah would be for the sake of Kiddushin. That's it. There will be one bi'ah, and then there will be mikudeshet, but then they would not be able to live together until they perform the nisuin ceremony with chuppah and sheva berachot and all that. Bekesef bet shamai omerim bedinar ubeshave dinar ubet hillel omerim bifruta ubeshave pruta. If you're going to do kesef, then Bet Shammai says you have to use at least a dinar or something that's equivalent to a dinar. It has to be that value. Bet Hillel says even the peruta. Peruta is the smallest denomination of a coin. So you can't use less than a peruta. You could use something that's worth less than a peruta. If you take half of a lentil, that will be worth less than a peruta. Peruta is nowadays is probably about a quarter. And a dinar is over 100 times the value of that. וכמה היא פירוטה? אחת משמונה באיסר האיטלקי. A peruta is 1/8 of an Italian isar, which was a very small silver coin. So you can see here that obviously where this is not an actual transaction of the value of something, because if it was, then you'd have to pay a lot more. But rather it's a symbolic transaction. It's not about the value, but rather doing an act that by which he by giving and she by accepting, she agrees to give over the rights of marriage to him exclusively, and he acquires that right exclusively, and thereby she becomes prohibited to every other man in the world. Not only is she prohibited and will be punished, deserves punishment if she is with any other man, also if any other man would try to give her Kiddushin, it would not work. It would just be an invalid ceremony. So this is done like in other areas of halakha. Just by saying words or intentions is not enough. You have to do some kind of action. So those are the three possible actions one can use to have a legal engagement. She can acquire back her own rights to marry others, either with a get, contract that he gives her that says you are now permitted to marry anybody, or with the death of the husband, right? Death until death do us part, but after death they are parted. Hayevama niknet bebi'ah ve'kona et asma b'chalisa or b'mitat hayevam. A yevama who is kind of like similar to someone who's mikudeshet, even though she didn't enter active Kiddushin, when her husband dies without children, and if there is a living brother, she has a zikah, she has an obligation to do something with that brother, and so that brother, the yavam, can acquire the yavama with bi'ah, only one way. He can't do kesef or shtar, but instead they already have that connection. She's not allowed to marry anybody else. So that's in that way it's except for him. In that way it's similar to Yibum. And Bi'ah will consummate that connection, and then they are fully married. However, she can extricate herself from that by receiving halitza. She takes off his shoe and spits in front of him, and then that breaks the yibum zikah. Or if he dies, then she is also free to marry anybody else. All right, that is the Mishnah. Now, the next Gemara is going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of technicalities and analysis of the wording of the beginning of the Mishnah. Right? Why did it use this formula instead of that formula? The Rav Shira Gaon and other Rishonim point out that this entire sugya, the entire daf today, and even into the next daf, it comes from a later layer from Rabbanan Sevora'eh. This is a generation of sages that's post the Amoraim, right? Even after the last generation of Amoraim. Amoraim, of course, taught, and their statements were remembered. But the Talmud was not finalized until after the last of the Amoraim during this period. So the Sevoraim often had their own sugyot, and especially at the beginnings of Masechtot, the Sevoraim added on. You can call them, Geonim call them Sevoraim. Some scholars call them Stamaim because they are anonymous. And you'll see throughout today's daf, I think almost everything that we're going to see is Stam, is an anonymous, the anonymous voice giving questions and answers. It will quote earlier sages, but this is not a back and forth of the sages themselves, but rather a creation of this editorial later layer. And you can see it from the style, which is very legalistic and verbal. analyzing the exact wording of the Mishnah. Even though the following questions are going to seem like they're very picayune and just technical, actually from the answers that are given, the answers get to some fundamental concepts that will come up throughout the Masechet. So it is really actually an introduction to the basic concepts of what Kiddushin is all about, even though they're embedded within these technical wordplay questions. Okay, Ha'isha niknet. Mashna detana Isha niknet. Mashna hatam detane Ha'ish mekadesh. Here in the first perek, it says Ha'isha niknet. A woman is acquired. So first of all, it uses the verb acquired, and it also uses a passive verb that a woman is acquired. But in the second perek, which is in quite a while. This is all the way on Daf Mem Aleph. This is a very long perek, this first one. There it says, Ha'ish mekadesh. So first of all, it uses the verb mekadesh instead of niknet. And second, it uses an active verb mentioning the husband who does the Kiddushin. So how come here it uses the subject of the woman, and there it uses the subject as the man? Okay, so we're going to answer the question about the verb first. How come here niknet and there mekadesh? Mishum dekaba'e limitne kesef. Because the first of the three ways that one is acquired is with money. Therefore, niknet, to acquire something with money, and niknet is a more fitting verb that fits with acquiring something with money. Well, now we ask, v'kesef minalan, and how do we know that one can even use money in order to effectuate kiddushin? Gamar kicha misedeh ifron. This is a famous example of a gezer hashava, where you have the same word in two different places. So we have the verb kicha, to take, in here regarding kiddushin, and regarding Avraham when he buys ma'arat hamachpelah, that's found in the field of Ephron. Ketibacha kikach ish isha, says here, if a man acquires a woman. The word yikach here means to marry. But it uses the word acquire. And over there it says, Natati kesef hatzadeh kach mimeni. Abraham tells Ephron, here is the money for the field, take it from me. And the word take, kach, is the same verb, and that's used in a monetary transaction. So since that same verb is used regarding Kiddushin, we learn that Kiddushin can be effectuated through a monetary transaction. V'kicha ikre kinyan. Okay, from that so far we learned that you can use kesef to do Kiddushin. But how do you know that's called kinyan? It doesn't say the word kinyan regarding by Avraham. V'kicha ikre kinyan dichtiv hasadeh asher kana Avraham. Oh, it does, right? Soon after that pasuk, it says, talks about, in chapter 25, it talks about the field that Avraham bought using the word kinyan. And that's why here it says Ha'isha niknet, because niknet refers to money, and she can acquire herself through money. That's what the Mishnah starts with. So that's why it's appropriate to use niknet here. That's one source. This is one source that you know that money and kinyan go together. Another place in Yirmiyah that says they shall acquire fields with money, and so it says the verb yiknu, and it says kesef. So that's how another place that we know that the word kesef and yiknu work together. So even according to this answer, you still need the kicha. We have to know kikach ish isha, and kicha here, and kicha regarding money of Avraham. So from that we know that kikach ish isha, and next word is ube'ala. Okay, so we're going to learn from there that bi'ah works as well. But from the word kicha we know that money works for Kiddushin, and from either of these two Pesukim we know that a monetary transaction is called kana, and therefore in our Mishnah it says Ha'isha niknet. Good. V'nitne atam ha'ish koneh. Good. And now I know why you should use the word kinyan here in the first perek. If so, how come in the second perek it doesn't use the same verb? Be consistent and say ha'ish koneh, a man can acquire a wife. Me'ikara tane lishana deoraita ulbasof tane lishana drabanan. And the answer is, I wanted to start off with Torah language. When the Torah wants to say one gets married, it says ki kach ish isha. and lakachat is with money, and that's kinyan, and so kinyan is a biblical word. So that's why you want to use a biblical word to begin with. But then the second Mishnah wants to teach you something else, that the rabbis call it a different word, right? The word Kiddushin does not appear anywhere in Tanakh to refer to marriage. This is a D'Rabbanan verbal use. Why did the rabbis call engagement Kiddushin and to say Ha'ish Mikadesh? Because when you do Kiddushin, the husband makes her prohibited to everybody else in the world, just like Hekdesh. If I take something and I make it Hekdesh, it becomes prohibited to everyone else in the world. There's also a way in which Kiddushin is different from normal property. I cannot make your item Hekdesh, right? I can only if I own something, I can make it Hekdesh. I can't just go to a random thing or someone else's thing in the street or a random person and say, all right, you are Hekdesh. Whereas for Kiddushin, it actually does work like that. A man, of course, with her acceptance, makes someone else Hekdesh, but this time Hekdesh not to the Bet HaMikdash, but rather as prohibited, set aside, reserved, so that he has exclusive rights of marriage. Okay, now we figured out the differences between the two verbs. But now, what about the subject of the verb? How come over in our Mishnah says Ha'isha niknet and with a passive verb and the focusing on the woman? Why not say Ha'ish koneh with an active verb focusing on the man? And that would be parallel to the second perek Ha'ish mekadesh. I understand why you have to say koneh, but how about say ha'ish koneh? Mishum deka ba'el mitnasefa v'kona et asma bedida tana name resha bedida. Because the continuation of our Mishnah at the beginning says that she acquires herself. So since that's talking about herself, so in the resha also we want to focus on her. All right, we need two things we want the Resha and Sefa to be parallel, and so she is therefore the subject of the Sefa. She acquires herself. We want to start off also her with the subject. She is acquired. Wait, you can still have it be parallel and focus on the man. That the man acquires and he gives over acquisition, makne, right? He transfers to the ownership or rights over her to back to herself. So you could still have the man be the subject of both verbs, and the answer is no, not really. You can't. Mishum deikal mitatabal delav iu kamakne min shemayahu de makne laha. Because one of the ways in which she acquires herself. Well, one of them is get. So yes, a get, the husband does give her. So for that, you could say makneh. He's koneh with kiddushin. He's makneh by giving her a get. He's an active participant in giving her back her rights to herself. But the other way is through the death of the husband. Now, that's not something he's doing actively, but rather that's something that's in the hands of heaven, right? The hands of from heaven. He just dies, whatever, a natural death. However he dies doesn't really matter. And so just by default, by dying, she acquires her own freedom. So this is not something that you can say the husband does actively, but you can say the woman is the recipient passively of both the get and of her rights to herself through the death of the husband. That's one reason why you have to focus on her. Another reason is if it says ha'ish koneh, I would have thought that he can do it even against her will, which is true for other items. A person can go and take something. Let's say it's hefker, he can take it. You don't have to ask the watch in the street if I can acquire you or not. So I would think that it would be against her will if it had only the active verb with the man as the subject. Therefore, it says she is acquired because she actually does have an important active role in being acquired. She has to consent to be acquired. In the usual ceremony, the bride doesn't generally say anything, but by receiving the coin or the ring, right, closing her hands and showing that she is willing to acquire it, that's fine, right? If she would throw it away and let it drop, then that would not be of good Kiddushin. So that's why we want to show that she has some agency as well in this, and that's why we want to put her into this Mishnah. Okay, so by the way, you notice that even though we're asking very technical questions, like really what's the difference if it says ha'ish koneh, ha'isha niknet, mikudeshet, not, I mean, it all means the same thing. So, right, these questions, like you don't have to really answer these questions. If it said it this way, you'd say, why isn't it written in some other way? So even though these seem like very casuistic, technical terminology, these questions, but through the questions and answers, we learn so many fundamental, important things, right? What's Kiddushin? That she is mikudeshet, set aside, prohibited to everybody else. We learn that she has to agree to it, right? So all along, these are fundamental concepts that will come up again and again. And I think that's the reason, and putting it in this question-answer format and remembering, it's a great mnemonic, because now when you read the Mishnah, Haisha, Niknet, Haisha, why is that word first? Why Niknet? What does that mean? What does Mikudeshet mean? Just by looking at the words of the Mishnah, and everybody knew Mishnah by heart, already that's a hint, a mnemonic to all of these important concepts that are fundamental to the Masechet. So this really is a good introduction, even though it seems like these are almost playful questions and answers. Okay, how come that it says she is acquired in 3 ways? It says shalosh in nekeva rather than shelosha. Why not say shelosha b'lashon zachar? Mishum dekaba elimitne derech. Because the word derech, it says she acquires herself in 3 derachim, and the word derech, v'derech lashon nekeva, hu dichtiv hodata, lahem haderech yelchu baha. We see from the pasuk in Shemot, right, tell them the way that they should walk, and it says ba as nekeva, so that's why shalosh is modifying derech, which is nekeva. Good. Ve'ela hadetanya. B'shiva derachim bodkim et hazav nitne sheba. Hold on. I'll compare this Mishnah to a different Mishnah in Nazir that says there are 7 ways in which we check the zav. A zav is a man who has an abnormal emission. And then he has a serious level of tum'ah. But however, we have to check him in 7 ways, because he's only a zav if we can determine that that is what caused the emission. If there's some external reason that might have caused the emission, like he ate too much, he drank too much, he jumped up and down, he carried something heavy, he had a different sickness, then that he is not a zav. So the Mishnah says we have to check him in 7 ways. It says the word derech over there, and yet it says shiv'a derachim, using the masculine term. Why not? Why doesn't it say sheva if it's going to be derech? Mishum dekaba edmitne derech vashkechan derech dikre lashon zachar. Because there wants to use the word derech, and we find that derech is actually a masculine word. Tichti bederech echad yasu lecha b'shiv'a derachim yanusu lefanecha. This is in the blessings at the end of Sefer Devarim in Kitavo. It says, you will conquer your enemies. They will come against you in 1 way, and then you're going to scare them off, and they're going to be so scared that they're going to flee in 7 directions, 7 ways. So you see, it says the word derech, and he used the word shiv'a in zachar. So that's why it says zachar in this Mishnah. Now we're just adding up more problems. So now we have 2 pesukim, one from Shemot and one from Devarim, that one uses derech in zachar and one in nekeva, and we have 2 mishnayot, one here and one in Nazir. One uses zachar, one uses nekeva. Now we have a lot of contradictions, so we have to answer them. Kera'eh hadadeh la kashyan, hachad betorah ka'eh, betorah yikre l'shon nekeva, tichtiv torat Adonai timima meshibat nafesh katab la b'lshon zachar. Here the pasuk in Shemot showing them the way to walk. They were talking about the Torah, right? The proper way to walk is the way of Torah. And Torah is certainly nekeva, as it says, Torah Hashem temima. That's a feminine form of the adjective modifying Torah. So Torah is certainly nekeva. So therefore, derech is an ambiguous word. It can go either way, depending on what it's talking about. Derech of what? A derech, if it's derech is referring to the way of Torah, then derech will be nekeva. And whereas hatam de milchama ka'ed darko shel ish la'asot milchama ve'en darka shel isha la'asot milchama katav la b'lashon zachar, the pasuk in Devarim that's talking about war, and war is a masculine thing. Even the word milchama itself might be nekeva. Milchamot, it is nekeva. Nevertheless, the concept of war in general, and so when derech is referring to war, and here it's that the enemies will come in one way and flee in 7 ways. So it's the way of a man to go to war, and not the way of a woman. Therefore, it uses lashon zachar. So you have to look at each one in context. The word derech itself can be used sometimes in zachar and sometimes in nekeba. Now, in regard to the Mishnayot, also we will resolve that contradiction. In our Mishnah, isha niknet bishlosha derachim. Bishalosh derachim. So it's talking about the ways that a woman is acquired. So it's going to use lashon nekeva. That's why it says shalosh. Hatam delegabe ish ka'eh. But the Mishnah about zav, that is talking about a man. Darko shel ish lidabek and darka shel isha lidabek. It's the way of a man to have to libadek, to have himself checked. A man who gets some kind of a mission, he has to check, is this because of zav or is it because of an external reason? Whereas a woman, although there is also zava, but zava is of a different nature. That's if a woman, it's not a weird emission, it's just blood, but it's blood that she sees not during her expected period. But in that case, it doesn't matter what the external reason is, right? If it's just at the wrong timing, then she is zava. So therefore, since a woman doesn't check in these ways, because a woman who sees blood at the wrong time will become tameh, even if it's something beyond her control. So therefore, that entire Mishnah only refers to a male zav, and so it says shiv'a derachim. It uses the masculine form. All right, good. So now we resolved all that. Now you see, as we're doing this, we get to bring in lots of other concepts, other places where it counts things, and be able to compare them together. So we get a nice tour of so many things throughout Shas. Now, my tama taneh shalosh mishum derachim nitne devarim nitne shelosha. Wait a second. Why'd you use the word derech in the first place? You only have to say shalosh because of derech, and derech, which is an ambiguous word that can go both ways. So you said shalosh because of derech. But why use derech at all, meaning a way or behavior? Why not say devarim in 3 matters? Right, that would also fit. Kesef shtar bia devarim. These 3 things are the matters in which one gets engaged with. And then you could write shelosha. As if it's so important to write shelosha to use a zachar, but still the question is, why not? Why not pick that word? Mishum deka ba'ed mitna bi'a bi'a ikre derech tichtiv derech geber be'alma ken derech isha mena'afet. Because one of the 3 ways, and as we'll see, the main way, really, kind of the fundamental way, is bi'ah, because that's what you're doing. You are getting married, and bi'ah is called a way or a behavior in the pasuk in Mishleh, the way of a man with a young woman. So is the way of an adulterous woman who tries to entice others. Okay, so you see, derech is said in the context of bi'ah, so derech is more appropriate than the word davar. All right, hatenach bi'ah kesef ushtar ma'ikal me'emar. Fine, you only answered the question regarding bi'ah, but what about the other ways of acquiring kesef and shtar? So that's you should have used davar for those 2, and the answer is mishum bi'ah, because because of bi'ah became the most important one, and the other ones went along with it. So bi'ah should be derech. So the other ones also, we said, those will also use the word derech for them. When they say that's not fair, there's 2 against 1. Why should the 2 follow the 1? The 1 should follow the 2. And if the 2 others, kesef and shtar, can be davar, then we should use davar for all three and not have all three follow the one. And the answer is hanachname sorech bi'ah ninhu. Even kesef and shtar are for the sake of eventual bi'ah. Right? This whole kiddushin is so that eventually they will be married and they'll have do nisuin, and that will be through bi'ah. So really, the kesef and shtar are leading up to bi'ah, and therefore bi'ah is the main way, even though it's the way that's not often done, maybe never, hardly ever done. Nevertheless, that's kind of conceptually, that's what we're getting at. That's what we're getting to. He's acquiring the right to bi'ah, essentially, with money. So even though he's using money, it's fundamentally leading to bi'ah. And therefore, bi'ah wins out even against the other two. And we use the word derech and not davar. That's all one answer. V'ba'et ema ha'maneh רבי שמעון היא דתניא, רבי שמעון אומר, מפני מה אמרה תורה, כי ייקח איש אישה, ולא כתב כי תילקח אישה לאיש. Okay, another answer why he uses derech is because this Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said in a Braita, how come the Torah says if a man acquires a woman and doesn't use the passive verb if a woman is acquired by a man? The answer is מפני שדרכו של איש לחזר על אישה ואין דרכה של אישה לחזר על איש. משל לאדם שעבדה לו עבדה. מי חוזר על מי? בעל עבדה מחזר על עבדתו. It's the way, meaning this is the general behavior. It's just human psychology. That the man generally will seek after the woman. He's the one that's going to seek out, ask her on a date, ask her, propose to her, and so on. And it's not the way of women generally to go and seek out a man to marry. Why? Because, well, it goes back to the origin story. Generally, a person looks for something he lost, not the other way around. If I lose my wallet, then I go look for my wallet. My wallet doesn't go out and look for me. So too, Adam Harishon, he was put to sleep, and he taken out of his body was either a rib or a side, and Chava was made from him. So and then he woke up, he's looking for the lost part of his body, right? Where is that rib? And so it makes sense that he would be looking for her, not she. She's the thing that was the lost item, is not going to be look for him. And so that's the way of the world. That's just basic human behavior. Interestingly, I just saw a news article that said even in today's society, this is true even in modern progressive communities and strata of society, where the man and the woman both have careers and both take care of the children and the chores around the house, and they do everything equally. Still, even in those relationships, the woman wants to be asked out on a date and wants to be proposed to. She doesn't want to have to go propose to the guy. And guys also, although they're equal-minded, they want to be the ones to pay for a date and ask the girl out and propose to her. So some things stay the same throughout thousands of years. Generally, there are of course exceptions here and there. But this is the general human psychology, and that's why our Mishnah says ha'isha niknet in the passive. Okay, v'haditnan b'shib'a. Also, that's also why it says derech. Right? It says the word derech because it's referring to the way. It's not just simply a matter, but rather this is a behavioral pattern. All right. V'haditnan b'shiv'a derachim bodkin et hazab. Now we have a question because back to that Mishnah, it says in 7 ways we check the zav. Now litne devarim. Here also, why not say the word devarim? Why say derachim? Hatam hakamashmalan dedarka. דמחלה יתרה להטויה לידי זיבה ודרכה למשתיה יתרה להטויה לידי זיבה. There also, the word derech is pointing to a certain behavioral pattern and teaching us that it's the way of too much eating or too much drinking to cause zav emission. And so it's not just a matter, a davar, it's actually a behavior. All right, so that answers that one. We're going to bring in a couple of other mishnayot. V'haditnan, etrog shaveh le'ilan b'shlosha derachim. Etrog is a curious kind of thing because it's kind of a fruit, but in some ways it's similar to a fruit. In some ways it's similar to a vegetable. And so the Mishnah says that a fruit is similar to a tree in three ways. Why say ways? Say litne devarim. Why not say three matters? It's similar to a vegetable in one way. So that's, since it says derech in the sefa, we say derech in the resha. But then we ask, sefa name nitne davar, so why not put davar in both the resha and the sefa? Hatam kamash malan de darke detrog keyarak. Oh, because in the sefa wants to teach us that the behavior of an etrog is similar to the behavior of a vegetable. Mayarak darko ligadel al komayim b'shat likitato isuro. Af etrog darko ligdal al kol mayim ub'shat likitato isuro. Vegetables, they require a lot of water. It's not that the rainwater is not enough for them. They have to grow near other sources of water in order to grow well. And that same is true for etrog. And also, when you have to decide what kind of maaser to bring, let's say, between the second year and the third year, and you have to decide if this is going to be maaser sheni or maaser ani. So when does the cutoff time? It's the time when it's harvested. When you cut the vegetables, that's what decides. It doesn't matter when it grows. And that's also true for etrog. It's whenever you harvest it. It doesn't matter when it grows. So that's the two ways. These are behaviors. And that's the two behaviors in which etrog and vegetables are the same. That's why it says derech. And since it says derech in the sefa, it says derech in the resha as well. Okay, last. V'ha'aditnan koi. יש בו דרכים שווה לחיה, ויש בו דרכים שווה לבהמה, ויש בו דרכים שווה לחיה ולבהמה, ויש בו דרכים שאינו שווה לא לחיה ולא לבהמה. ניתנה דברים. Regarding this koi is an animal that has some characteristics that's like a behema, and others that's similar to a chaya. There are different halachot for behema and chaya. For example, chaleb, forbidden fat, is only forbidden in a behema, but is permitted in a chaya. So this koi, some kind of water buffalo or something, we're not sure what this is. Does it belong to this category or the other category, or maybe it's its own category, the Gemara says sometimes, b'riyah bifnei asma. So the Mishnah says, a koi in some ways, derachim, it's the same as chaya. In some ways, it's the same as behema. But in some ways, it's similar to both chaya and behema, and in some ways, it's unique. And it's not similar, not to chaya and not to behema. Okay, the Mishnah goes on and explains all that. But we're asking, why does it say derachim? Why not say devarim? Vetu. And the second question, haditnan, zo achat min haderachim sheshavu gitei nashim leshuchrei avadim, nitne devarim. Back in Gitin, we have a Mishnah that says this is one of the ways in which a divorce document for a wife is the same as a document for emancipation of a slave. And here it says also derachim. Why not say devarim? Two matters in one matter in which they are the same. And so we don't have explanations for all these. So beforehand we were trying to explain each one piecemeal. Right? This has a derech. The etrog has a derech. The zav has a derech. But we can't be consistent. We can't find reasons why here it would have to say derech instead of davar. So rather, we're going to give one answer that will answer all of the questions above. Ela, kol echadika pelukta tane derachim. Rather, anytime there is a controversy, it says derachim. I'm explaining this according to Rabbeinu Hananel. Whenever there's a controversy in the Mishnah, it says derachim. V'chol echadeleka pelukta tane devarim. If there's no controversy, then it says devarim. Takaname dekatani sefa Rabbi Eliezer omer etrog shaveh leilan lechol davar shema'amina. And this works because go back and look at the Mishnah about etrog, and there is a controversy. Rabbi Eliezer says that etrog is like a tree in all matters and is not like a vegetable. So you see that there's a machloket in that regard, and so that's the reason why it says derech as opposed to davar. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.